Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. This is our Friday episode for December 20th. I'm Kirsten Korosec, and I'm joined by co-host Margaux MacColl. And I'm super excited that Max Zeff, who covers all things from venture to AI, really honestly everything, is also joining us today. Max, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here, especially so because by the time you're listening to this, OpenAI's Shipmas event will be over, and I will be able to rest finally. We're recording this on a Thursday, so that means that if by Friday OpenAI releases AGI or something, we won't know. But if that's existing, good luck to everyone. So that's all I can say.
Well, you need the rest, but I swear, I'm telling you, it's not just OpenAI that is really pushing the news ahead of the holidays. I mean, I don't know about you, Margaux, or Max, but my email inbox is just it's as if the holidays are not even happening. I'm getting requests for interviews on the 23rd and on the 24th. So that's something new this year. I don't know. Is that happening to you or is this just me?
No, 100%. And especially because I cover a lot of government adjacent stuff. I feel like Trump is on a roll and there's a million announcements all the time. So it has not been a restful week before the holidays.
No, not at all. And speaking of the news churn is just insane. I don't know if this was on my bingo card for 2024. It would have been on my bingo card for 2021, 100%. But SoftBank CEO announcing a $100 billion investment in the US. Was this something, Margaux, that you expected? Because no. I was like, what?
No, it's not. I like that SoftBank is back. I like that they never quit. Yeah, he announced $100 billion. He says it's going to create 100,000 jobs. He also did this during Trump's first term with $50 billion. I don't really know how this is measured because I think it's just investments into things. I don't know whether he sends Trump a text with how many investments he's made or whatever, but it's a lot of money. Yeah,
Margaux, I feel like you're more tapped into this kind of thing than I am. I remember the first $50 billion announcement, but what happened with that? Did that happen?
I was trying to find that.
We need a spreadsheet.
I read a quick piece on this and I was trying to figure out how they measured that. I mean, they made a lot of investments into US startups. I don't know if they have a counter to 50 billion or if they were just going to do that anyway and they just told Trump to get brownie points, which is fine. I mean, yeah.
I think that's a really good theory. I think that's an excellent theory. Also, here's the thing. This is to all the reporters who might be listening out there. Let's all make a New Year's resolution for 2025 to follow up on all of these claims and promises and see if they're actually doing it.
That's a good idea.
I give you that assignment, Margaux.
Oh, thank you.
Well, on the show today, we have a couple of deals, including Humba Ventures' recent raise and Cohere's quiet deal with Palantir. After the break, we'll dig into two themes: why we aren't seeing the IPOs we expected this year, and how careful founders should be when taking investor money with foreign ties. Margaux, let's kick this off. Humba Ventures, because this is so much more than a fundraising story, to me at least. What's going on here?
Yeah, so Humba Ventures, which is a newish kind of sister fund to SUSE Ventures, which has invested in Robinhood, Human Interest, plenty of big companies. It's a sister fund, $40 million to invest in defense tech and hard tech, technologies. For me, it's interesting because I feel it's the third fund that I've heard of in the past few months that's relatively small, but geared at hardware defense companies that historically need a ton of capital. You have Michelle Voles from A16Z is reportedly raising $50 million for her own fund in the space. I talked to this guy, Jamie Gull, who is an ex-SpaceX engineer. He has a small fund for this. I'm just thinking about if funds like A16Z and Founders Fund are just going to take all the seed rounds for these defense companies, or if these small funds can kind of fill that gap and still get to invest in really amazing companies that end up being the next Anduril.
Margaux, I cover AI, so I'm not usually super tapped into the defense tech space. So could you just kind of explain to me quickly, why are we seeing this crazy increase in defense tech funds investment into this space right now? Is this related to Trump coming in, or is this just its own beast.
Yeah, this is like every conversation I've had for the last 2 years. There's a confluence of things. The fact that there are a bunch of geopolitical conflicts, the fact that there's Ukraine, Israel especially, I think kind of fueled this because obviously Silicon Valley has a lot of ties to Israel. There's also just the fact that there was a big gap because Palantir kind of broke through the defense tech mold and became this crazy successful company. And then we kind of had a while before there was another defense tech startup. And then Anduril came and has been killing it. We're also at the point where Anduril's old enough that I think a lot of like ex-Anduril people are going off and starting companies that obviously these people want to invest in. And then there's kind of like an age-old theory that like in recessions or when people think recessions are coming, that like government adjacent companies seem like a safer bet because like the DoD is never going to like decrease their budget probably. So there's a lot of theories for it. Those are my kind of vague thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been some movement before what I would call the Trump effect, but that seems to have augmented it a little bit.
It's definitely amplified the voices of people that are very, very hawkish on China. For some reason, the like libertarian crowd and the like hawkish on China crowd are like kind of one and the same. So yeah, a lot of people at Mar-a-Lago right now are big China hawks and really see the need to double down on like America first investments.
Yeah, and my understanding is that these are smaller funds. How many of them are attached to much larger VC firms? Because in this case, it's Sosa Ventures, and then you mentioned another one just now. Should I be thinking of these as side projects, or are they mostly independent efforts geared at defense?
I think how you should always view like defense and space tech is that they might be independent efforts, but it's people really tapped into like the ecosystem. So Humba is the only one I can think of that's like technically like a sister fund, but obviously Michelle Bowles, she's not going to be competing with her old firm A16Z for deals probably. I would imagine they're going to share a lot of deal flow because she's tapped in with these people. Jamie Gohl, who's the guy that I was talking to, is like in with the SpaceX world. So like he's sharing a lot of deal flow with those people. So yeah, it's mostly independent ventures, I think, but it's people that are tapped into these very, very important ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on, I should mention and tease Rebecca Balan, another reporter here at TechCrunch. She just recently talked to Gilman Lewis, who I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm so sorry if I screwed up your name, who is co-founder of America's Frontier Fund. And they actually spend quite a bit of time discussing the uptick in government money and defense tech in Silicon Valley. I feel like this is going to be like possibly a weekly theme, Margaux.
It's always a weekly theme. I love it.
Be prepared. Well, speaking of companies that do a lot of stuff with defense, my deal is about Palantir. So I do predict, though, that Margaux and Max are going to have a lot to say about this because it overlaps absolutely with both your beats, defense and AI. So here's the TLDR. A new reporter here at TechCrunch who's amazing, Charles Relay, he broke a story about how Cohere, a company that specializes in the enterprise AI world, is quietly working with Palantir. I kind of want to back up a little bit because, Max, I think you know the most about Cohere. My understanding, enterprise AI, but educate me a little bit about what that really means. And do they have any competition?
Yeah, so Cohere is a company that was founded by Aidan Gomez. He was an intern on one of the most influential papers that is kind of inspiring and motivating this recent AI boom. And because of that, anyone who's connected to that paper has gone off to start their amazing AI startup, and Cohere is one of them. Cohere is interesting because they are not really super focused on this flashy consumer-facing product like OpenAI, like Google with Gemini, like even Anthropic with Claude. I mean, they're really just completely focused on creating these tools for enterprise, like having enterprises kind of tap into their deep data pools and using AI to basically make sense of all of it. It's really what they specialize in. So Charles, reported that they have kind of done this quiet deal with at least one defense tech company. And it's really interesting because a lot of the AI world has been very hesitant to work with defense companies because they're all very safety minded. Like a lot of AI people have fears about, AI going out of control and kind of being used by malevolent powers or whatever. And for as far as we know, Aidan Gomez is the least kind of doomer of this group. I mean, he is the least concerned about this kind of existential fear around AI. He wrote a paper last year saying that we should all be worried less about existential AI risks, which was a little controversial. So now to see them working with a defense tech company, it's a trend we're seeing right now with AI companies, but it doesn't seem to be the most popular thing with a lot of the AI crowd. So this was a really interesting scoop.
Yeah. So I was actually talking to Charles a little bit, and I asked him, I'm like, why were they so secretive about it? And he wasn't totally sure. He said one possible reason is that they're trying to avoid the scrutiny that comes with partnering with defense-related companies. So to your point just now, and especially with Palantir, which is so vocal now on the topic, which cue Margaux, you know the most about Palantir in this group. To me, what's striking about this deal and just Palantir in general, they just seem to partner with everyone. It's like everyone is a potential customer, but that's just sort of my outside view. Is this supported at all in fact?
I mean, I have no idea. They're a really big company. So yeah, they do a lot of partnerships. Something the article noted that I think is interesting is Palantir has a ton of commercial and defense contracts. You can work in Palantir and never touch a defense project. So it's possible that they're just working with the commercial side. I don't know, but it does point to a larger trend. OpenAI just signed a deal with Anduril, which is very clearly defense related. So yeah, you're seeing a lot of these AI companies move into at least defense adjacent or just defense company partnerships.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, we have to move on, but after the break, we're going to talk about two themes: IPOs, one of my favorite topics, and whether foreign investments are no longer in vogue. Welcome back. Like I mentioned before, IPOs, one of my favorite subjects. And 2024 was this big promise that we're going to have all these IPOs. And it kind of didn't happen. So Max, talk to me about IPOs. I want you to sort of answer this question. Is it dumb to IPO on an election year?
That's a great question, Kirsten. So what I will say is that we've seen a lot of companies kind of punting on IPOing this year. We've seen some successful ones recently. I mean, ServiceTitan, Reddit. I mean, we've seen some big IPOs in 2024, but Databricks CEO Ali Ghodsi just said that they are waiting to IPO until at least next year. He said during an Axios conference that it was dumb to IPO this year. That said, they did just raise a $10 billion Series J. That is correct. A Series J. There's a lot of
Series J. That is insane. Okay.
Yes. I'm not sure how many letters come before J, but it is quite a few letters. So quite a few rounds. And then also the Skims co-founder also said that, they are putting plans for an IPO on the back burner. So I think there's a lot of people who have just said there's too much instability right now. There's so much fear about interest rates. There's so much fear about geopolitical conflict and just what this means for the economy. Then we're just kind of putting it off for this year. So that's kind of where we're at. One question I would kind of raise here is just why would you IPO this year? I mean, for the companies that you guys are covering, are you guys seeing that people are still wanting to IPO, or do you kind of think that people are just comfortable raising these huge rounds in the private market? What are you guys seeing?
Okay, well, I'll jump in first. So what I see in the transportation sector is a bunch of companies spiraling and dying because they took advantage of the whole SPAC craze a couple of years ago in order to access that cash, because there wasn't really a path in the venture community to get the kind of cash they needed to bring deep tech, really pre-revenue, we're talking, to give them the runway that they needed. So you saw a lot of companies sort of taking advantage of that, and a lot of them have fizzled, gone bankrupt, shut down, pivoted, all sorts of stuff's happened on that front. And then you see the big companies like Waymo just raised more than $5 billion, mostly from its parent company. And there's been speculation for a long time, are they going to IPO? I think that you hit on an interesting and important point, which is certainty. Businesses don't like to do anything in an uncertain economic market at all, unless they're absolutely forced to. And I think the SPAC movement was because they were forced to. So if there is a means to raise Databricks $10 billion in the private sector, why? You're going to be beholden to someone, right? But why be beholden to a retail investor that may or may not totally get your business yet, especially not necessarily in Databricks' case, but especially if you're pre-revenue, because you will never meet expectations. I love a good IPO because I just love digging into S1s, but I wonder if we're even going to see an uptick in 2025.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, Marta, do you feel like this is still the dream for early stage startups, that, the dream is to go public? Or do you feel like just because of the state of the world right now, they're more interested in raising a huge Series J or getting acquired?
I think it's still the eventual dream. Palmer Luckey had a quote recently where he said that he was still very much interested in going public eventually. Again, I write a lot about like early stage startups, like you were saying, especially in like the like hard tech, deep tech, national security, whatever we're calling it these days. A lot of the startups that I talk to definitely see like there's a history of a ton of acquisitions from defense primes. That's like very much how we got the current landscape of defense primes. So I think a lot of them would not mind being acquired. And we've seen a lot of the bigger defense tech startups start to make a ton of acquisitions. So yeah, I think, they would love to go public. A lot of the defense tech startups we're seeing today will probably either, fail, obviously, or be acquired.
Yeah. One thing I just wanted to note from something Ali Goetze said right after they announced that they raised this $10 billion was that he said that it's just much less important for companies today to IPO than it was 10 to 15 years ago, which I think is very true. I mean, I think it's clearly evidenced by their own raise. And also, we've seen, Waymo raised, $5 billion. OpenAI raised over $6 billion this year. You're just seeing these insane raises this year. And I think it really kind of says a lot about where the IPO market is today.
Can you explain a little bit I don't know a ton about like the IPO market. After you raise one of these giant rounds, like how much does that tend to put off the IPO for? Like, I don't understand how Databricks is going to raise this much money. And then why would they IPO next year? There's no way they're going to burn through like billions.
Well, one thing that Goetze said is that they were using a lot of this money to kind of pay off early employees who kind of wanted to, sell some of their shares. So, and they're also making huge moves these days. I think it was earlier this year, 2 years ago, Databricks acquired Tabular, which was a startup that was generating $1 million in revenue a year. And they purchased it for $2 billion.
Wow.
And part of that was because they were in such intense competition with one of their competitors, Snowflake. But this is just, I think it says a lot about the kind of AI craze we're in right now. It's just that these valuations get inflated like crazy. So the capital required to keep these things running is just unlike anything we've seen before. But in short, I think we could see an IPO next year. I don't think that's insane.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I was going to say your note about how easy it's been if you're a specific company, so an AI related sector company, to raise money. And it's sort of reminiscent of the EV craze that was happening and then also the autonomous vehicle craze. And so, I'm of course always pivot back to transportation. But I was just looking back while you were talking at Rivian, and Margaux, to your question, like they were raising billions of dollars and still had enough, let's say, cachet to have a record-breaking IPO in 2021. Still, though, it's not getting to the levels of Databricks. Like they raised $12 billion in their market debut, and they had just raised several billion that same year. So it suggests that you could still go to IPO and get a very high valuation, but it misses one important thing, which is that raising in the private sector $10 billion is like dwarfs the type of sort of frenzy and hype that I saw around EVs and AVs. So it seems to have no bounds.
Yeah.
Well, we need to move on to our last theme, or second theme, I should say. And it really is asking the question of whether founders should be cautious of investors with foreign backing. And Margaux, I'm going to hand it over to you because you recently wrote a story about 20 venture firms having signed this clean capital certification. I'm interested in what that is, but also more broadly, if this is percolating throughout the rest of the sector, not even just in the VC world, but kind of everywhere, this idea of taking investment with foreign backing.
Yeah, so the certification basically pledges that you haven't taken money from US government designated adversaries. So that list includes Russia, China, Iran, Cuba. Obviously, Russia and China are like the two big ones that we're thinking about here. Over 20 firms signed it. And It's a huge thing that I hear founders, especially in like hardware, defense tech, worried about. If they take money from a firm that has ties to these countries, like it can really prevent them from being able to work with the government, which is obviously a huge part of their business plan. It's even becoming more relevant. Like I kind of struggle to like classify what I write about as like defense tech at this point. Cause like we just talked about like OpenAI working with Anduril, but like we don't call OpenAI defense tech. You know what I mean? Like it's totally spilling out. And the more defense tech unicorns we have that are partnering with not traditionally defense companies, it all spills out. Suddenly any AI company might have to worry about potentially taking money from China in case, CFIUS looks through their cap table and is like, well, you're potentially sending money back to China. So it's a huge concern. I think the certification is an interesting step towards creating like a standardized way to vet your investors.
So the first story we talked about today gets to this trend, which was prior to launching this defense tech fund, apparently he approached and consulted a bunch of friends about whether he should take international money for Humba, especially when the team would be investing in startups that sell to the US government. And the consensus was, to your point, US, UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, great. Everyone else, stay away from. So you're seeing this even at a $40 million fund level. When we were talking about this prior to recording, I was thinking, oh, these are going to be like the big funds. No, this is like even at a smaller level that it's becoming a theme and kind of a requirement.
Well, if anything, it gives them a bit of a competitive advantage. We're talking about these small funds that have to compete with major funds like Andreessen, Sequoia, Founders Fund for these defense tech deals. Them being able to point to their certification and be like, look, like we don't take this money can give them kind of an advantage. I note in the story too that like you don't see any big firms signing this. When I reached out to a lot of the bigger firms, Founders Fund, Andreessen, those are the two I got response back from. So I'll talk about them. When I reached out to them being like, okay, well, why didn't you sign? Would you sign? They basically said, first of all, like they don't really sign open letters like as a policy, because I'm sure they're asked to sign 1 million. And they also pointed to public statements they've made that are very, very, very like anti-China. It's interesting too, because the China line has at this point, I think, become very agreed upon that you don't want like Chinese capital. The Middle East line is where it gets a lot blurrier because Andreessen Horowitz, I don't know if I can officially say they have Saudi money, but they've been spotted in Saudi Arabia. They have a lot of dealings with Saudi Arabia. And that is technically not a US adversary, but it is a complicated country to do business with. And companies might change the line of where they will accept money from.
Yeah. Do you think that this is like kind of a way for these companies to just put a stamp of approval on themselves to say, like, we're good, don't like look any closer into this because we're not taking money from foreign adversaries? Or do you think that they're doing this kind of anticipating some sort of regulation coming down the pipe?
There have been a few, when I was doing research for this, there have been like a few really crazy cases where like the FBI is investigating Hone Capital, whose main LP was like a Chinese corporation, but it was based in California. And the FBI is like currently investigating them, according to the Financial Times, to see if the venture firm has sent proprietary information back to their Chinese LPs. And you have a lot of China hawks that are gaining a lot of power in Congress, especially right now. There was a congressional committee report that really slammed any venture firms and 5 major venture firms for investing in Chinese companies. At the time, Sequoia was on that list. I don't know where it stands now after splitting from Sequoia China.
Yeah.
To your question, though, I'm wondering, earlier you mentioned CFIUS, which is, for folks who don't know the acronym, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And I'm wondering if they're going to be, and they regularly look into like publicly traded companies. Famously, they looked at Too Simple, which was a self-driving company because of its Chinese backing. And this is something that happens somewhat regularly, but I wonder if they're going to be more active in 2025. I mean, there's been anti-China investment sentiment for a while, but it definitely seems to be coming from voices that I didn't expect before. Let's just put it that way. And I'm wondering if 2025, we're just going to see them even more active. Because to your point earlier, you said the FBI was investigating, which was interesting to me. I always think of CFIUS as being the agency that handles a lot of that.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more cases like that. There was a thing that happened, I believe, last year that I don't know why people didn't talk about more, but there was like a Sam Altman-backed AI chip company that took Saudi investment, and CFIUS made them unwind that investment, which is really big. Like, you really don't hear about that often. And I think that they're absolutely placing more scrutiny on venture capital, especially with all the venture capitalists that are at Mar-a-Lago right now. There's no way there's not increased scrutiny.
Yeah, I think the big picture here, I do wonder about kind of what the idea is behind this crackdown on Chinese investment, because I think there's two ways you can think about it. Like, one is that you don't want this cutting edge technology and this information about what these American tech companies are building to go back to China. And then the other way to think about it is that you just don't want China to have this much influence over our companies. And I don't know, I'm curious, like, as someone who kind of watches this a little more closely, what do you make of that split there?
Of like the danger?
Yeah, like what is the fear that's kind of motivating all of this in your mind?
I know. I actually think about that a lot. I'm curious if you guys have had conversations with LPs. LPs are obviously like the hardest kind of like part of venture capital to reach and talk to regularly. And I honestly don't really know how much constant information LPs are getting about investments. You know what I mean? Like if there's a corporation that has money in China and they put some money into whatever, A16Z, aren't they getting a ton of information about Anduril beyond like financial information? I don't know. And then like, is the financial information that useful to like the Chinese government? To me, it seems like a bit of a stretch, but I also understand why you just wouldn't want to have any paths of informational travel whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it feels very much like the pendulum swing. You know, there's always been concerns and fears about China taking technology and using it. And I think that's lasted for, I mean, my gosh, for more than a decade. I feel like I've reported on that multiple times. Now it feels more pronounced and more specific and urgent because of the rise of AI and some sort of technological and the rise of social media, which, Max, I wanted to ask you about because, you know, I'm wondering how this relates to what we're seeing with ByteDance and TikTok, because what's interesting there is like the focus is on TikTok, but ByteDance is actually pretty active outside of just creating this social media platform, TikTok, which gets the most attention.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we are seeing a lot about the TikTok ban in the news these days. It's going to the Supreme Court. But one thing to consider is that the TikTok ban, you know, that's the name for the law that kind of outlaws it. It actually just basically outlaws any, you know, foreign adversary from investing in kind of an app that could be considered a threat to national security. It's a very subjective measure. And ByteDance is not only the owner of TikTok, they also own an AI study companion app that is like top of the charts in America for education apps. They also own this app called Lemon8 that's another kind of social media shopping app. So ByteDance has a lot of other investments here. And I mean, really, when you look at the fear behind the TikTok ban, I mean, that's, I think, it's been painted as kind of we're scared about American data getting to China. But really, I think a bigger reason is that people are scared about the influence that China could have over Americans with that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of why I think it's interesting to look at how this is affecting kind of smaller funds as well and, you know, smaller startups, because it's really a question of, are we really concerned about the data and the information leaking, or are we more concerned about the influence that China could have on American business?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if it was about the data, then the attention would be focused on more than, you know, at least in the case of ByteDance, focused on much broader than the TikTok. I think partly also it's something that is used and it's something people understand, and it has, to your point, great consumer influence. And so it's more of that fear. But data is a real thing. And maybe what we're seeing happening here at this sort of the VC level is more of a focus on data and less on influence, because it's really getting at a granular level at that point. It's not getting to this very public-facing social media app and, you know, having them spout off about that. It's like, no, we don't want you to be involved at this deep tech startup that is 6 months old. I mean, that's pretty granular and low level, at least for me, in my view.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, since we're all in agreement, amazing, we are out of time. I just want to thank Max for coming on the show. Hope you come back again. Margaux, thank you again for joining us. And Equity will be back next week. But until then, you can find Equity under the handle at EquityPod on X and Threads. See you next week.
Equity is produced by Theresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.